It seems to me that one of the difficulties of reading a continuous gospel Sunday after Sunday after Sunday is it sort of puts those passages into silos. If I asked you what the gospel was last Sunday, would you be able to tell me? I will tell you right now, right? Last Sunday, it began with a little phrase that there are two commandments of God. Love the Lord your God with your whole heart, your whole soul, your whole mind, your whole being. And another is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And then a parable occurred. The parable of the Good Samaritan that we've heard time and time and time again. But oftentimes maybe not hearing it the way those people at the time of Jesus heard it. Because the priest that walked away, the Levite that walked away were not bad people, but their understanding of their obligations to God kept them from seeing what they needed to do for their neighbor. And in so many ways, in fact, even destroyed their understanding of what it means to love God. St. John, in his letter, tells us, how can you love God? How can you say you love God whom you don't see if you can't love your neighbor who you do? But that was last Sunday. Today we have what might seem like a totally different story. That story of Mary and Martha. But is it a totally different story? Might it really be the other side of the coin of last week's? Last week we had a priest and a Levite who were so consumed with what they thought were their duties, their obligations to God, that they couldn't see their neighbor. And today we have Mary and especially Martha. Martha, who is so consumed with her belief in her duties to her neighbor that maybe she can't understand how God fits in. Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus. Now, in those days, that meant something specific. To sit at the feet of another was to sit at the feet of a teacher. To sit at the feet of the teacher was to learn. And to sit at the feet of Jesus, the teacher, is to learn just who God is. We saw in our first reading the story of Abraham, that Abraham must go out to the stranger coming and show hospitality because of who he believed God is. And in the Old Testament it says, you might feast with angels in doing so, and so Abraham does. Martha becomes so consumed with that notion of hospitality that she does not understand how that can impede her love of God, and interestingly, impede what it means to serve her neighbor. She's so consumed with the tasks of neighborly love that it becomes a burden to her. Have Mary help me, can't you see? I'm the one who's doing it all. I imagine one of us has said that in this congregation more than once, huh? What I think the gospel is telling us, last week's and this week's, is we can't separate. We can't use our love of neighbor to keep us, our love of God to keep us from doing what we need to do for one another. And we can't keep our doing for one another impeding our love of God. founder of the Franciscan order, St. Francis, began his religious life being disowned by his own father. And in that terrible experience, he began understanding that it was God who was his true father. And understanding who God was, suddenly he began understanding, not only in his head but in his heart, that all people are sisters and brothers. All people. In fact, this year we celebrate the 800th anniversary of Francis going to Damietta, Egypt, for a dialogue with the Muslim Sultan of Egypt. All people are sister and brother. In fact, for Francis, it became all creation is sister and brother. All creation given to Francis out of love from a tremendously devoted and doting father. Love of neighbor allows us to see what love of God is all about. Love of God allows us to see our neighbor truly as sister and brother, and not as alien, not as other. Seeing last week's and this week's gospel together allows us to see that there is a true unity in that commandment of God, to love God and love our neighbor. They're not two separate things. They're not things we can use against each other. But they are the core and meaning not only of the Christian life, but of life itself. Jesus told Martha that Mary chose the better part. And that's not that sitting at the feet of Jesus is better than serving in hospitality. What I think the better part means is that we understand that unity, that we don't try to set one off against the other, love of God, love of neighbor, that we begin realizing that love is love, and that love comes from God. That is the better part. And if we truly believe it, it will never be taken away from us.